want to go back about 50 years. It was September 8th, 1974, a Sunday morning, and I was asleep. And Carl Bernstein called me and said, "Have you heard?" And I said, "I haven't heard anything because I've been asleep." And Carl, who then and still has the ability to say what occurred in the fewest words with the most drama, said the following: "The son of a bitch pardoned the son of a bitch." I, too, felt really good that I decoded that. And, of course, Gerald Ford, who'd been president for 30 days, pardoned Richard Nixon. I remember thinking, it's the final corruption of Watergate. Nixon gets a pardon, doesn't really have to be accountable or maybe even go to jail, and Ford gets the presidency. I thought that. Generally, in the country at the time, there was a lot of evidence not fully confirmed, so it was suspicions that there'd been some sort of a deal between Nixon and Ford. So 2 years later, when Ford ran against Jimmy Carter, history shows, and most of the analysis establishes, that Ford lost because of the pardon and the suspicions. So 25 years later, I decided I would write a book about the legacy of the Watergate scandal in the presidencies of Ford through Clinton. This was during the Clinton administration. So I called Gerald Ford up, who I'd never met, never interviewed, and said, "I'd like to talk to you about the pardon you gave Nixon," figuring Ford would say, "Gee, I'm sorry, I've got a golf tournament." Instead, to my surprise, Ford quickly said, "Oh, I'd be more than happy to do that." Gerald Ford turned out to be one of the most open public officials I'd ever met. So I explored this, having the luxury of time. I went to California, where Ford was living 25 years after the presidency, and interviewed him 7 times at his home in Rancho Mirage, California. And I remember recording it for history, sitting there in his den and saying in the 7th interview, "Why'd you pardon Nixon?" And he smiled and he said, "Well, you keep asking that question." And I said, "Yes, I don't believe you have ever really fully answered it." And he paused and said, "You're right. I've never told the story of what really happened, haven't even told Betty." And so I was very quiet. As they say in the CIA, let the silence suck out the truth. He said he was going to tell. One of the most interesting times of my life as a reporter. And he said, "Here's what happened. A week before Nixon resigned, Al Haig, Nixon's chief of staff, came and said to me, Nixon's going to resign, and he expects you to give him a pardon. And I'm listening there, and I go, unrestrained, holy shit. There was a deal. So you can hear this on the tape. Ford slams his hand down, says, there was no deal. And I said, but wait a minute. You got the presidency, got the pardon. And then he said, let me tell you what happened. And he literally formed his hands like this and said, all of a sudden, I was president. I'd been president for 30 days, and prior to becoming president, I'd been Jerry Ford politician, always thinking about what's in my political interest. All of a sudden, I'm up here, and I'm looking down on the country, and I have a different role. I have to ask what's not good for Gerald Ford, but what's good for the country. What's in the national interest? And he said, very convincingly, he said, look, president for 30 days, everything in the news was about Nixon. What about his tapes? Is he going to go to jail? Is this going to happen? Is Henry Kissinger going to stay? And Ford said in this plaintive voice, I needed my own presidency. And I realized that was my obligation, and I had to get Nixon off the front page and out of the news into the history books. So I pardoned him. I knew I was going to be slaughtered. I knew I was going to be criticized, but I was convinced that this was in the national interest. And I think about that now. That's such an important question. What's not in some politician's interest or some party or some interest group, but in the real national interest? Anyway, I published this, that what happened, and my conclusion that what Ford did was really in the national interest and was not corrupt. I got a call from Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of John F. Kennedy, the late president. And she said she and her uncle, Teddy Kennedy, had read this and agreed and said, we're going to give the annual award that we give at the Kennedy Center each year, normally give it to a leading Democrat. For the first time, we're going to give it to Republican Gerald Ford, not for being a politician, but for doing one thing, pardoning Richard Nixon. Now, I did not go to the ceremony, and I watched it later on YouTube, and there was Ford kind of vindicated, and Teddy Kennedy saying, what this man did is exactly what my late brother as president wrote about: courage, self-sacrifice. And I'm watching this, and what a cold shower for me to look at this and realize on that painful road of self-examination, which I too infrequently take, that here I was sure it was corruption, and you examine it in detail and talk to the participants. I talked to Ford's lawyers and aides and so forth, and this is what happened. Instead of it being corrupt, it's courage. So you can't be in my business and not ask the question, what else don't I understand? What else did I get wrong?